In today's episode of the unknown side of Yu-Gi-Oh, we're going to be talking about some of the Konami cards, or cards based on various properties owned by Konami. The first cards in today's episode are the B.E.S archetype. Short for Bacterian Empire Ship, this archetype is based on the Gradius game series. Now, why would there be a Yu-Gi-Oh archetype based on a video game? Well, the Gradius series was one of Konami's cherished titles. Gradius is a side-scrolling shooter arcade game. In the game, you control a ship called the Viper, which needs to defend itself against waves of enemies. Think of Galaga, but horizontal rather than vertical. The game has become synonymous with the phrase, destroy the core. Because to defeat almost all the bosses in the game, you need to destroy their core, which is seen throughout a lot of their archetypes artwork, which we'll get into just a bit. Like in most games, the Vig Viper starts out with a pretty weak gun, but by collecting a power-up, you can choose which option you want. Similarly, the archetype plays like its video game counterpart, in that each of the B.E.S monsters are based off of the types of enemies, but before that, let's go over the most integral part of the B.E.S archetype. B.E.F, Zelos, and Boss Rush. Both of these spell cards heavily support the monsters of the archetype. Boss Rush is a continuous spell that while on the field, you can't normal summon or set, but the payoff is that whenever a monster of the archetype, either a B.E.S monster or big core, is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon an archetype monster from your deck. Given the effect of the card, the name is quite fitting, as with boss rushes, as soon as one is defeated, the next boss comes out as soon as possible. On the other hand, there's the field spell B.E.F Zelos, which has 3 effects. The first is on activation, you search for boss rush and add it to your hand. Then, all B.E.S monsters gain 500 attack and defense, but more importantly, they can't be targeted by your opponent's card effects. Last but certainly not least is that once per turn you can special summon a B.E.S monster from your hand, and when a B.E.S monster is special summoned, you can place 1 counter on it. Counters are incredibly important for the archetype, as they need counters to stay on the field in most cases, and you'll notice that in the effects of the monsters when we get into it. But before that, notice the artwork of B.E.F Zelos. Although not entirely frame for frame, the artwork of the card tries to emulate what it feels like to play Gradius. Now, onto the B.E.S monsters. There are 9 which share the same exact name as their game counterpart except for 2 cases. For example, there's B.E.S Crystal Core, the card and the enemy in Gradius. The only exception is B.E.S Assault Core, which in-game is just Big Core, but now let's go through each of the B.E.S monsters. There's the aforementioned exception, which is B.E.S Assault Core, which also is the most unique cases of the B.E.S monsters. If your opponent controls a monster while you do not, you can special summon Assault Core from your hand. But what makes Assault Core unique in the B.E.S archetype is that it's the only monster of the archetype which doesn't have the ability to place counters on it, thus protecting it from destruction effects. However, given the origins of Assault Core, it actually makes sense that it doesn't have protection like its brothers. See, the Big Core is the standard design of the grunts of the Bacterium Empire series, so it's a basic enemy, meaning that it doesn't have its special abilities that the bosses typically have. It also isn't a card in the TCG, only making an appearance in some of the GX Tag Force games as one of their many in-game only cards. Next up are the Big Cores, in which there are 3 versions and each is an upgrade onto the last. There's B.E.S Big Core, the original, then there's B.E.S Big Core MK2, and then there's B.E.S Big Core MK3. Each of the big cores have different stats entirely, but have the effect that on summon, you place 3 counters on them, and if they are attacked or they attack, you remove a counter. If there are no counters to remove, then you destroy the monster instead. The MK3 has an additional effect that you can banish it from your graveyard to shuffle all B.E.S monsters from your graveyard into your deck. Moving down the list of attributes, as there is a B.E.S monster for each attribute except for Divine, is B.E.S Tetran, which is a wind attribute B.E.S ship. On top of the archetype effect that a normal summon you place 3 counters on it, and if it's involved in a boundary, remove a counter, or if not, destroy the card. But also has the ability to remove a counter to destroy a spell or trap card that's on the field. Interestingly enough, Tetran is the highest selling of the B.E.S cards, at a surprising $50. Compared to the other B.E.S monsters that sell less than 20 cents, Tetran blows the rest out of the water, and a graded version is worth even more, with the prices of a perfect 10 being almost $500. Onto the water attribute, there's B.E.S Crystal Core, which has a unique effect on top of the archetypal effect to change an attack position monster to defensive position at the cost of removing counters. The last remaining attribute is Earth, and there's actually 2 B.E.S monsters that share that attribute. There's B.E.S Covered Core and B.E.S Blaster Cannon Core. Covered Core is level 7, has 2500 attack, and has a slightly different archetypal effect. Rather than the usual 3 counters, when Covered Core is normal summoned, you place 2 counters on it. Then if it attacks or is attacked at the end of the battle phase, you flip a coin. And if you call it wrong, only then does Covered Core lose its counter. And if Covered Core battles without a counter, then you destroy it. Then on the other hand, in the last of the B.E.S archetype, there's Blaster Cannon Core, which is arguably the tankiest of the B.E.S monsters. This level 9 Earth machine has 2500 attack and 3000 defense. Blaster Cannon Core has the archetypal effect but can also special summon itself from your hand if your opponent controls more monsters than you do. And it makes sense that Blaster Cannon Core is the strongest as it's the 5th stage boss. Now, despite all the attributes being covered, there's actually another monster of the archetype that always seems to fly under the radar, and that's Gradius. Simply, Gradius is a level 4 light machine monster with a subpar 1200 attack and 800 defense that has the flavor text, a high-performance jet fighter with power capsules for variable attack capabilities. This is meant to be Vig Viper, or the ship the player controls throughout the game. Now, although the B.E.S archetype never saw any type of competitive success, except for some of its members, the archetype is one of the many Konami Easter eggs that are within Yu-Gi-Oh!, like the next cards in our list. Koitsu is a level 9 Water Fairy Union monster, which already in itself is pretty unique. Also, just in terms of its level and typing, Koitsu is the highest level Union monster and was the very first level 10 Water monster released. Although in terms of its other stats, meaning its attack and defense points, Koitsu is severely lacking with only 200 attack and 100 defense. As a Union monster, Koitsu once per turn can equip itself to an Aistsu monster you control as an equip card. While equipped, the equipped Aistsu gains 3000 attack points and gains piercing damage. Koitsu is pretty unique in that it can only equip itself onto another specific monster, Aistsu, which is a level 5 Fire Fairy normal monster with 100 attack and defense and has the flavor text, "He seems to be very unreliable, but he might have incredible potential," referring to what happens when he meets his counterpart Koitsu. Also included in this group are another duo like Koitsu and Aistsu. There's Soitsu and Doitsu. Soitsu is a level 3 Wind Fairy monster with 0 attack and defense that has similar flavor text to Aistsu, reading, "Apparently totally unreliable." He wonders if he has incredible potential. This incredible potential refers to his counterpart Doitsu, which is a level 4 Earth Fairy Union monster that when equipped to Soitsu gains 2500 attack points. Now, if these four look oddly familiar, they should. Koitsu alongside Aistsu, Soitsu, and Doitsu make several appearances in different Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Specifically, they are the groups in the A-Team Trap Disposal Unit, Fossil Excavation, Fossil Dig, and Gravity Collapse. And you might be asking, why are these characters always being used? Well, like the B.E.S cards, they are actually another Konami property. The four are playable characters from the game Parodius, which is another side-scrolling shooter that parodies Gradius. Each of the names translates to that other guy, that guy, and which guy. Next up is Getsu Fuhma, a level 4 Dark Warrior monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense, and has the effect that if it battles a zombie monster, you can destroy it at the end of the damage step. Now, despite the mediocre effect, Getsu, like the other cards on today's episode, are based off of other Konami titles. Getsu is based off a Japan-only Famicom game called Getsu Fuhma Den. This game is an action role-playing game that is said to be very similar to the Castlevania series, but with more hack and slashing, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games. And the final boss of Getsu Fuhma has also been incorporated to Yu-Gi-Oh! Kokki, a level 6 Dark Zombie monster with 2400 attack and 2000 defense, that at the end of the battle step, if Kokki battles a warrior or spellcaster type monster, you can destroy that monster. This effect is the counterpart of Getsu's effect, where they both counter each other's monster types. And this tracks with the games as Kokki is the final boss of the games. You can actually see the two battling in the artwork of Fuhma Wave, which is a trap card that lets you target a face-up monster in the field, destroy both that monster and one that shares the same attribute but a different name. Even the effect of Fuhma Wave is indicative of the battle between the two, as they are both dark monsters but are constantly fighting each other. Sneakily coming in next is his level 3 Earth Warrior monster, Tactical Espionage Expert. This monster with 1300 attack and 1200 defense pays homage to Solid Snake, the protagonist of Konami's Metal Gear games. Tactical Espionage Expert has a pretty simple effect that when it's normal summoned successfully, no trap cards can be activated, but that does not prevent your opponent from just activating a trap right after the normal summon goes through. So in reality, it's a pretty useless effect. Despite the immense popularity of Metal Gear, the only special thing about it is its artwork. Despite the seemingly unique effect of Tactical Espionage Expert, in reality the effect is not unique at all. There are 3 other monsters that provide the same exact effect and stat line that all share the elemental attributes. There's Invasion of Flames, the fire attribute version, then there's Creeping Doom Manta, which is the water attribute copy, and last is Eagle Eye, which is the wind version. Another fun fact with the artwork is that the background of the card is very similar to the tanker location for Metal Gear Solid 2. But if you still have a hard time believing that this level 3 monster is meant to mimic Solid Snake, Kevin Tuart, the head of the US development of Yu-Gi-Oh!, confirmed this card was meant to be a reference to Solid Snake in a post. On the more wholesome side of Konami's properties in Yu-Gi-Oh!, there's the level 4 water normal monster, Space Mambo. This fish monster has 1700 attack and 1000 defense points, and the flavor text that reads, "A space Mambo floating in the vast universe." This living relic was found in the ruins of a super civilization on Alfred 4. Space Mambo is a reference to the side-scrolling shooter games called Space Manbo from 1989. In the game, this Space Manbo is a super weapon that was found on the planet Alfred 4, which perfectly matches the card's flavor text. In the game, this Space Manbo acts as the final boss of the game. But why is the final boss Yu-Gi-Oh!'s counterpart a fish? Well, due to the artwork on the game cover, a joke developed that the final boss, the Space Mambo, was a giant sunfish, on top of the Japanese translation that a sunfish is called a mambo, so that didn't help out Mambo's case. Funnily enough, you can actually see the original Space Mambo in the background of the Space Mambo's card artwork. Towards the bottom left of the card, you can see the Space Mambo flying in space. On the topic of fish, and specifically sunfish, next up is Nimble Sunfish, a level 2 water monster with 1000 attack and 100 defense, with an effect that's pretty in line with its archetype, the Nimble monsters. When destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can Foolish Burial a fish-type monster, meaning you can send it from your deck to the graveyard. And when you do, you can Spell Summon another copy of Nimble Sunfish from your deck. Now, Nimble Sunfish, relative to its archetype, is an old card, being released back in 2010 in the Synchro era, so its effect is significantly weaker than the other Nimble monsters, and so it's a forgotten piece of the Nimble archetype. In terms of inspiration, one might think that Nimble Sunfish is referencing Space Mambo, but that's not the case. Nimble Sunfish is actually based off of a character from the same game as the previously mentioned Koitsu, Aistsu, Soitsu, Doitsu, Parodius. The inspiration are the duo of characters called Mambo and Samba, which are reoccurring sunfish throughout the series. Next up is the Sasuke Samurai Foursome of the Goe the Gallant Ninja, Masked Ninja Abisu, Lady Ninja Yae, and Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke. So before we dive too deep, let's go through each of these monsters. Goe Gallant Ninja is a level 4 wind monster that has the effect that when it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you must discard 2 random cards. The only downside is your opponent needs to have at least 5 cards in their hand to do so abusing Goe's effect is a lot harder than other hand-ripping cards. The next member is Lady Ninja Yae, which is a wind warrior monster. But Yae is level 3 and has the effect to discard 1 wind monster, so you can return all spell and trap cards in your opponent's field to their hand. This giant Trunade effect is surprisingly random for level 3 monster, but despite the strong effect, Yae saw no competitive play throughout the years. On to the third member, Masked Ninja Abisu. This level 4 wind warrior monster with 1200 attack and 1800 defense has the effect that if you control a face-up ninja monster other than Abisu, you can return your opponent's spell and trap cards to the hand equal to the number of other ninja monsters you control. Additionally, each Goe the Gallant Ninja you control can attack your opponent directly this turn. So suffice to say, Abisu is a pretty good support for Goe. Last but not least is Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke. Unlike its brethren, Grandmaster Sasuke is a light warrior monster rather than wind. With an average stat line of 1800 attack and 1000 defense, Sasuke has the effect that at the start of the battle step, if Sasuke attacks a defensive monster, you can destroy it. Simple but effective. Grandmaster Sasuke has the predecessor card in the iconic Sasuke Samurai. Despite being a different attribute, the effects are almost the same, with Sasuke Samurai needing to attack a face-down defensive monster, rather than Grandmaster's face-up defensive monster. However, the fact that they are from the same game, share the same name, and have very similar designs confirms that they are the same. Sasuke Samurai is a pretty iconic card, as it appears in an incredibly popular quick play spell, Hand Destruction. But that's not its only appearance, as the monster also appears in Skill Shock and Common Sacrifice, 2 anime-only cards. These 5 monsters are all from the game Legend of the Mystical Ninja, but the Yu-Gi-Oh versions of these cards are more serious and non-comic-like. But due to their names being the same and sharing so many designs between the two, the association was made. Alright, and that's it for this episode of the unknown side of Yu-Gi-Oh! Are there any of the cards you'd like to see us cover in the series? If so, let us know down in the comments below.